Welcome everyone to SIG Instrumentation biweekly meeting. Today is July 20th. We have a couple things on the agenda. First, okay, so Damien and I have been having a very heated argument about skipping stability levels. So my position is that it is perfectly acceptable to skip stability levels because beta was just introduced and there are many existing metrics which would have been beta in the past had it been available then. And given the fact that it was not accessible in the past, it is perfectly acceptable for these metrics to skip beta and to become stable. Specifically, I am referring to this here, I will share this. These metrics are very old. We're talking 5 years old. We actually don't want to make these beta because beta is permissive in the changes you are allowed to make to the schema of a metric. And in doing so, we would open the door to people breaking other people downstream. And so my position is that we should promote these directly to stable because we are GAing this feature. We should have GA'd this a long time ago, and we never had the resources to actually get it done. And we are getting it done now.
I'd love to hear Damien.
Yeah, I can share my opinion as well.
Brought up
so mine is more like it's not like I don't agree that we really need to make this metric stable, but rather I think that the current mechanism for graduating metrics is complex. I guess it's hard to understand to all the developers of Kubernetes because, for instance, all the old metrics that we have that are in alpha are implicitly in beta already. Like we already have some implicit requirements for deprecating them, although it's marked as alpha.
Well, they're not beta because we permit them to actually mutate metrics that are alpha.
Yeah.
So they can remove labels if they're so they're not actually beta. We're just trying to prevent people from breaking.
Yeah. But so what I'm referring to is more like we already make sure that we don't break anyone while we modify these metrics, if we ever modify them. So they are kind of like implicitly in beta already. Like we already have some guarantees towards this metric because we make sure, although there is no automated process, like we make sure by reviewing them that no one breaks downstream.
Sure. Sure.
And we make like most people go through deprecation cycle already for them.
Why do we do that? Like, what is the principle behind doing that?
Oh, it's not to not break anyone and
to not break anyone.
We both agree on that field. It's more like my personal opinion is more about how could we make that easier for anyone really to understand the process, because today like it's either you or I that go to them and tell them, well, you cannot just remove this metric, you need to go through a deprecation. And most of the time like we end up kind of battling with them because they refer to the documentation which says that alpha metrics can be changed and removed anytime. So I'm more trying to make it easier for anyone to follow the steps and not have like a lot of edge cases like we have today because of the history that we have to make up with, like the fact that we have so many metrics that predates stability. And so my personal reasoning is that we shouldn't skip stability levels to make only have one process for graduation, and so that like anyone that has a alpha metrics knows that they need to go through beta and then stable, and not like that they could go through stable directly.
No, but what we're doing, if we're skipping beta, we're actually giving people more safety, not less.
I also don't necessarily have a problem with people skipping beta generally. as long as, like, when they do that, we should make sure that they know what they're doing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
talk to
because
them
they're
about it.
committing to something.
Yeah.
But I think I feel like if I were new coming to this and looking at it, I would be like, oh, I should go alpha beta stable. Like that wouldn't be lost on me because of, I guess in theory, we could go straight to stable.
So should we maybe document it such as we say anyone that has an alpha metric could go straight up to stable, but they have to make sure that they don't want to modify the metric ever, because once
Yeah.
it's stable, they won't be able to do anything. Or they can still have the option to go to beta if they really want to make sure that there is more users that use their metric, but still have some guarantees, because we will be the sign-off and we will make sure that there are no change that could break anyone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
so that's pretty much fair to me. Like, as long as we have a process that is easy to follow, because in this way, like, it will more be the choice of the person that promotes the metrics rather than us. Like, I felt like at first that we would be the one telling people to either like go through beta or go through stable, and that would be just complex. But if we leave them the choice, that's fine by me as well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't own the metrics. We own like, and in this case, it's a little weird because David and I participate in other SIGs, right? So like graduate kubelet resource metrics to GA is really, to be fair, a SIG node cap. It shouldn't actually even be an instrumentation cap, to be honest, right? Because this
Oh yeah.
this domain is not SIG instrumentations.
Yeah,
I
no,
think the
so if
motivation
we-
was originally to support the metric server, which was why it was a SIG instrumentation thing, even though like the code ownership is clearly SIG node.
Yeah, so I think
Probably
it's
a cross
totally
SIG
fine
thing. It
now
might
that
be a
we've
cross SIG
discussed
cap,
it. Like
yeah.
it's
Cross SIG cap.
yeah. So what I wanted to say that, like, to me, it's clearer now why we want to do that. We just need, like, in my opinion, to document it properly,
For
or
sure.
at least have like a newer documentation where we explain, like, you can either choose to go beta or you can choose to go like internal. You can also choose to go straight up stable. But you have to understand that if you go to stable, there is nothing you can do about the metric anymore after that.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. I will update the
Um,
documentation about stability levels and the process around that.
Sounds good. And the other thing like that might be related. So I mentioned to you privately, like the discussion that I had with Wojtek with regard to the link between stability level and caps.
Yeah, the lagging thing.
Yeah, is it something that we've documented already, or
We have not documented that. I will document.
yeah?
It's
and for
general
prediction
guidance.
readiness, like, is it a
It's
criteria?
general guidance. It's not a rule.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, but that came out of my discussions with introducing beta stability levels with the reliability working group and SIG Arch. Okay.
So
So
is
I
the
will
plan
update
to
the
make that a
documentation.
requirement, or just like a best practice or best effort?
It's general guidance, but obviously there can be exceptions to this. Like this cap is extremely old, like it's 5 years old. And we don't want anyone mutating these metrics anymore,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
I was more asking for the next caps, like the one that are either in progress or
yeah,
the
in
one that will
process,
be-
yeah, we would, the guidance would be alpha metrics and beta metrics for GA, and then stable after you get feedback.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds good to me.
Okay, there are two more topics. So one, I think David knows about this one, but so do you know much about the metrics probes endpoint, David?
I know that it exists, and I'm pretty sure the metrics are pod per pod, so they're pretty high granularity. Which is
Yeah,
why
they're really
put up
high
their own-
granularity, and I was just wondering, how are we not hitting memory issues with this endpoint today?
I think I know why. If that's the same metric I remember, I had a lot of concern with these ones, and I asked them explicitly, like the metrics themselves don't make sense if you don't have the name of the pod, because you cannot like match the probe with anything. So I asked them explicitly to remove the suffix that is generated either by the stateful set controller, deployment controller, or like if it's a cron job or whatever. So
But
I
there's
asked
a
them
pod
to.
UID in the thing.
Oh, so that might not be the same then.
No, take a look at the link that I sent.
Oh, you've put it in.
So I'm a little bit surprised that
Oh
we
yeah.
have not gotten complaints about this so far, because pod UID should never be in a label. Never, not for Kubernetes,
Why not?
because it's going to be
I
super
think
high
I remember
cardinality.
why.
I mean, it should be, if you already have pod namespace, that also should uniquely identify a pod. Like pod
Yeah.
UID on top of those two shouldn't be identifying. If that makes sense.
It depends if it's what about ephemeral pods?
I don't know why, but that term isn't ringing a bell for me.
Or so like, let's say
Oh.
you have ephemeral, like let's say you have short-lived pods.
Yep.
And a long-lived kubelet.
Yep.
Yeah, isn't this a problem?
It is.
I mean,
This
I'm
needs to use
expecting
a
kubelets to be
collector, doesn't it?
long-lived, because
Yeah.
that would be normal Kubernetes behavior, right?
Clean up pods.
Yeah, this,
And
so
i-
I'm
if-
okay with this endpoint, this metric, this idea of
Yeah,
this metric, which is, tell me the number of times you have seen the liveness, readiness, or startup probe succeed or fail. That I am okay with, right? However, the granularity of pod namespace and pod UID seems problematic to me. Like, I would prefer probe type and result. So I like this, then I would know how many times has this kubelet seen a live Z or ready Z fail.
That's not nearly as useful for, I mean, the probe metrics are, I think, targeted at like the same audience as like KSM, where I want to know
That's the
how my pod's
problem.
doing.
That's the problem. I don't think this is the domain, this sort of metric falls into the domain of Kubernetes, because that's what KSM is for.
But individual probe results aren't.
No, I think they are quite
Right.
useful, because here, let me give you an example. Like, let's say we're doing an upgrade, right?
Mhm.
Let's say we're doing an upgrade of the Kubernetes control plane, and we remove some APIs, right? And what I want to know is, has this had any effect on the workloads in my cluster? And then, like, if I have just very coarse granularity, kubelet liveness, readiness, results, I know very coarsely, yes, this has borked my cluster, because I see liveness and readiness failures, in my kubelet that are skewed really high, right, towards failures.
Yep. I mean, but the thing that customers say, or users today can get from this endpoint, is they can, for example, have an alert, or at least a graph or something that tells them how their pod is doing in terms of readiness and liveness probes, right? So it's like a thing they can know about today that wouldn't be possible without this metric, and that KSM can't know either, because it's aggregated in a sense into the pod status, but that's not nearly as like granular as this is.
I mean, if people want that kind of granularity, then they should be scraping logs, because the cardinality is really high. And
I mean, it's a separate endpoint, so I'm not concerned from a scrape perspective. And they do actually, so they don't use a collector for Prometheus, but they do delete series after containers go away, so that they shouldn't be leaking memory.
So if I may say something, like if you look at like there are two metrics in the file, like one is the prop total and the other one is the duration. And I was the one to merge the duration, and that's the one where we trimmed the pod name to remove the suffix. And so it doesn't have the pod ID, it doesn't have a complete pod name either. It only gives some information about which pod approximately has fading probe. So like that was the sanest option I found back then to reduce the cardinality.
You should know which pod it is because it's going to be the one served by
but
that
you don't really
kubelet.
need to know exactly in your alerts. Like your alert can point you approximately like what is the name of the pod that has probe that fails, and then you can check yourself in your cluster.
The name of the pod for that kubelet, right? So I actually think you do end up knowing which pod it is.
No, because it looks like if you had two pods from the same deployment, it would trim the, or like from the same replica set, it would trim
yeah, but you have two different kubelets. So
no,
you know that one of the
same node,
kubelets,
right? If you had two pods from the same deployment on the same node,
if they're on the same node, then it would be a problem, yeah. But usually they're not on the same node.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, I mean, I kind of like this endpoint, but I don't like the granularity and it concerns me. And I just wanted to get some feedback on it.
I think, I don't think at this point we should remove it. At least the first metric that does have really high granularity has existed for a long time.
So you're worried about breaking people?
I would be very worried about breaking people. Not to question Damien's wisdom, but I personally don't like the inconsistency between the two. I
don't like it either.
Well, I mean, it's a separate endpoint. It's okay to have high cardinality because I think the people who are using this it's warranted basically for people who care about this stuff.
No, but it doesn't matter if it's on a separate endpoint because it's still eating up kubelet memory.
I mean, yes and no. Like the kubelet is tracking the results of all of the probes anyways. Like this is already, to put it a different way, like there's plenty of data structures in the kubelet that are per pod that track the state of pods. Like this isn't any different from the rest of the kubelet's responsibilities.
I mean, that's fair. I guess it is tracking pods by their UIDs. I mean, it must, right? It's the kubelet.
It's like, that's its job. Yeah.
That's its job. Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem with the inconsistency today is that you cannot really aggregate between both metrics, because like the second one that doesn't have the suffix, like you cannot make any kind of aggregation. That's one of the problem. And the other one is that when I reviewed this PR, I wasn't aware that it was a second endpoint. I only learned it today. So that's also why I was pretty annoying with the cardinality when I first saw the metric. That's why it's a bit different, but yeah. Generally, I agree with Han that something should be done.
So what do you guys think? Like, should we get rid of the pod UID to make them consistent and then promote them to beta? Or would that cause people to break? And that's concern.
I would personally actually change the newer metric only and try and align it with the previous one.
So you would add the pod UID?
Yeah.
I would add the pod UID and I would change the, did we used to do, oh, it looks like.
But that's also problematic because then like in cluster, like for example, the CI clusters that have a lot of pods that are generated, like a lot of ephemeral pods that are in, we already described today the probe endpoints, like they might have cardinality issues. or even like cron jobs in general, if you have a lot of them.
Are you talking about like,
So imagine today, like in a CI cluster where you're already scraping this endpoint and you change the histogram metric to match the other one.
because it's a
Because
histogram?
if it's an histogram metric, you have like 10 times more metric than the other one. Plus the fact that you don't, like you add even more time series because you like include the pod UID, you remove the thing that trimmed the suffix. So you have like essentially 10 metrics per pod. That can be a lot.
I mean, this histogram doesn't even have buckets. What's going on here?
Does it just use the
It
default
doesn't.
Yeah, it just uses
Yeah,
the
maybe the
bucket.
default one.
It
Yeah,
should be fine.
So maybe 15 or something, I think the default.
yeah. I mean, I also don't like the subsystem name. I would prefer we just call it kubelet probe total, kubelet probe duration seconds, because that makes more sense to me. But whatever, it's a little late. The ship has kind of sailed. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. We have one more agenda topic. I wanted to get to it. We'll can shelve this and come back to it. So there is this effort right now for LTS. I don't know how much you guys are aware of this, but basically long-term support for Kubernetes versions. Basically, like the premise would be you designate some Kubernetes version, let's say 1.2.5, to be an LTS version, which means it's supported for 2 years. While normal Kubernetes releases are supported for 1 year, right? Basically 3 releases. So this has interesting implications to stability and breakages, right? Like if you go from LTS, if you jump from LTS to a normal Kubernetes supported version, you could have a stable metric that just disappears. There's like no window for error, right? Like we've padded stability levels so that like we can deprecate them over like sequential cycles, right? And like people have like some headway, this is deprecated, it's going to be removed. You can re-enable them, right? If you really need them for one release, and then they will be gone, right? And so you should adjust your charts accordingly. However, with LTS, these presumptions just break down. And so there are interesting implications to how we might want to reconfigure our stability levels and even make them possibly stronger in terms of guarantees and have longer deprecation cycles. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
The thing I wanted to ask you was whether we should pursue, like, because I think it was Jordan that mentioned that we shouldn't remove or shouldn't have a deprecation cycle for stable metric because it's a stable API and we should treat it as is. Is that still something that we should pursue or we should consider?
Wait, say again?
Because I think Jordan mentioned at something, you know, like there was this whole effort of making stable APIs undeprecatable and
yeah,
unremovable.
Yeah.
Should we do the same for metrics? Because I think he mentioned that at some point as well. Of like
We kind of already
maybe
do
doing
that.
the same for metrics.
We kind of
Yeah.
already do that, right? We have documentation which tells us which ones are deprecated. We have hidden metrics so you can re-enable them.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that today with the framework, we could theoretically, and we document the fact that you can deprecate a stable metric.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for general APIs. And I think, like Jordan mentioned at some point, that we might want to follow the steps or like in the footsteps of the APIs and
make them forever metrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem with that is like some metrics just might stop making sense. Like, you know,
So, yeah.
as
The
Kubernetes
thing is
code
that,
base
like,
speeds.
yeah, the point I liked was that the metrics are tied to a feature, and when a feature is stable, it's not supposed to be removed. And I don't think there are ways to remove them today. Maybe there are.
But you can disable them. You can even disable APIs, right?
Yeah, but then
Runtime
they can
config.
also disable, like they should do the work to disable the metrics if the code is disabled as well.
I mean, we can already disable metrics, so we can also disable APIs through runtime config.
Yep.
So I'm not sure why we would have forever metrics. I mean, I fail to see the argument for it, is where I'm coming from. Like, what does it give
I mean,
us?
because when it's stable, like people expect them to never change and to always be present, I guess, similar to
No, I mean, they
APIs.
should expect what the documentation tells them, which is like,
Yeah,
you're given like a year. You're guaranteed at least a year, like 3 releases. But I'm suggesting due to LTS, we may have to make this like 2 years.
Mhm.
Anyway, we can come back to it, but like the LTS thing is just kicking off. So I don't know the implications just yet, but it's just something to think about because, yeah, it changes the way that we would have to treat our guarantees. All right, time is up. And yeah, we can revisit this topics next week. Cool. Then, yeah, I guess I will see everyone in triage next week.
Take care, everyone.
See you.